I don't know if you believe that things happen providentially. You may say coincidentally. Dale's mentioned this in his sermons where he starts to prepare a lesson, and in the middle of preparing the lesson, something happens here in the church or with somebody, and the lesson actually fits with what's going on here at the congregation. And so that's kind of what happened. Nora came to me and said, the lesson we're supposed to do is the awareness of God's presence energizes you for your work. And the whole lesson was meant to be about work as a Christian. And like she said, that I had a lesson already prepared, and that's what it was. Mm-hmm. And so all I had to do was polish it up a little bit. So we're going to be looking at Matthew chapter 20. While you're looking for Matthew chapter 20, in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 24, the writer says, there is nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good labor. This also I saw, that it was from the hand of God. And it's kind of a basis for us as we start. There's supposed to be satisfaction in work. Now, we tend to pick out a chapter like this and say, this is a chapter that we're going to talk about. And so we compartmentalize it like it's the only thing that exists. And all of you are mature enough Christians that you now know, I sure hope you know, that you can't take something just out of context. That there's stuff before it and stuff after that's going to have an impact on the meaning of this particular chapter or what we're looking at. In chapter 10, and I'm not going to outline every one of the chapters for you, but in chapter 10, for instance, Jesus starts at the Bible, Matthew starts there where he chooses the disciples. And these disciples are going to be the foundation, the groundwork, as it were, for his church. And so it was important that he laid out, and in that chapter, he lays out their mission, the charge that was meant to them. And he charged them with things that they were going to have to face that were not really going to be punitive death, but there were also rewards attached to it. And he discusses that in those chapters. In 12 through 16, we see a lot of stories, parables, and if we begin to look at those and put them all together, we see that he's in conflict with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the people who were religious, the ones who were abiding by their traditions and their laws. And I don't have to repeat all of this to you, and I can tell by the looks in your faces, you're already saying, yes, we know that. But if you look at the Gospels, look at those particular books and match them up, you see that he spends a lot of time talking to and about the religious leaders. But at the same time in these chapters, he pulls people aside, sometimes feeding them, but teaching them or healing them. And almost always he has a story or he has something that is going to be of importance to those people. When he did those things, he wasn't necessarily talking so that the Pharisees would change what they're doing. He was addressing the people and how they should live and how they should perceive him and life in general. And as we get further into Matthew, we start looking at chapter 18 and 19. Jesus is telling people how they should actually live. And then he pulls, in chapter 20, he pulls his disciples aside, and he has a message for them. Now, we tend to take this first part of this chapter 20, and we tend to say, well, this is a generic story that's meant for everyone, and that's pretty much what I'm going to do today. But he was directing it to them. And so, if you were to go through each of those books and look at those, just keep in mind that they do have, in fact, a point. Now, recently, well, a year ago, you just reminded me. A year ago, what happened that made us all so very happy?
This all started.
What?
This all started.
This all started. I thought you were going to say it gave me a chance for solitude, and it was a time for me to reflect.
I'm tired of solitude.
No.
I got to work from home.
I was essential employee. I never stopped on both of my jobs.
And you're what I'm getting ready to talk about, or who. When you look at what happened, there were a lot of people that did lose their jobs. Some were laid off or furloughed. Others had to work from home. And it was a big mess job-wise. And there were certain people who were essential laborers. And if you look at the Bureau of Statistics and start looking at all the different kinds of jobs, there were certain kinds of jobs that were indispensable. There were ones that they were recession-proof. They were the ones that, regardless, you're going to work. Can you name some?
Grocery stores.
Grocery stores.
Government.
Banking.
Banking.
Teachers.
Teachers. Yeah, some of those were
We were home.
shut it off, but you were important, and you had to learn to do that online. Any others?
Medical.
Medical for sure.
Cops.
Cops.
Fire
Now,
departments.
are any of these really recession-proof? Just because you're a cop, does that mean that you can't ever get laid off? Just because you're a doctor, does it ever mean that your hospital doesn't get bought by somebody else and you're ousted? There aren't many jobs that are 100% recession-proof. And so we're gonna be looking at this story about these laborers. Every job really is vulnerable. When we get a job, you may not have done this. I'm just talking about me primarily, because I know none of you would ever have these kind of thoughts. I looked at other places and said, that has to be better there than what I'm doing now. The grass looks so much greener over there. Have you ever been jealous? Have you ever thought, well, maybe I need to change because it's better? Or, if only I could just work there. Or if I have this other kind of job. I don't like being an X. I want to be a Y, whatever the job thing is. So there's always a kind of an adrenaline rush. Quick story. I was working with a nurse at LCU, and she said, I had to put together all this paperwork, 700 pages of stuff, to turn into this committee to convince them that I was good enough to be a tenured professor. And she said, putting together 700 pages of documentation on why I'm good just wore me out. And she said, I wish I would have had somebody that could put that. And she said, and then it had to be electronic. I couldn't just turn in that paper, that wad of paper. It had to be electronic. And she said, it just blew my mind. So we started talking to her about building her course for online. And she said, this is going to take a long time. I said, yeah, a good course probably takes about 80 hours. 80 hours? And so she put her stuff down or put her computer down. She said, I don't have 80 hours. I said, that's what we're here for. We can do this. And she said, you can make a lot of money if you electronified all this stuff. And I went, I could retire. And I could do this, and I could charge all these elaborate fees for being a consultant, put this work together for them. I could do it at my pace, in my time. And I got euphoric. I was going, are you kidding me? Instead of the $10 an hour they're paying me, I could charge 12. Man. We all have that kind of thing. We all look forward to that. But how would you define a job? How would you define job?
Something you do to support yourself.
Okay. Work.
Mm-hmm. Scheduled.
Schedule is something you get up, you have to do, you go to. Now, I've had lots of jobs. And the first week or two, that was exciting. I couldn't wait to get up and go to that place. After about 3 weeks, I was going, isn't there more? There's got to be more to life than this. Why am I doing this day after day, 8 to 5? And what's the word that we hear about our job most frequently, especially the longer you have a job? It becomes a what?
Burnout.
Burnout. I was going to say a grind, a daily grind. And you got to push yourself and work toward it. And you've forgotten that joy that you had in that job. And you're going to have to help me with this. I'm not real good at remembering phrases, but there's something about an old saying that says, if you do something that you really love, you'll
Never work a day in your life.
never work a day in your life. A job is work. If you're doing what you love, that's a vocation. And we had vocational training when I was in school, back in the dark ages. They would sit us down with the counselors and say, what kind of vocation do you want? And of course, they were very limited. They never said you could be a roller coaster designer, you know, which would be, hey, that'd be exciting. Or you could be a golf course designer, or they always said you could be a teacher. You could be a mechanic, you know, and they have all these jobs lined out for you that are so generic, and you never even know that there's more to it. So we're looking at this sense of vocation being a calling in life. So let's turn to chapter 20. Let's look at it. Is there a rule or a tradition that one of you has to read? I mean, would somebody read the first 10 verses?
For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one hired us," they answered. He said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last one hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more, but each one of them also received a denarius.
Okay. If we have a vocation, like I was saying, if we have a calling, if we have something that we know that we have to do, we have a responsibility with that vocation. And it's something that we know that's probably a God-given gift for us. We all have a gift for something. That doesn't mean we necessarily wind up doing a job with that gift. I always envied Larry Rogers. If I could do woodworking like he did, I would have never been a teacher. I would have just hid away in a garage somewhere and made wood things and just been happy all day long, I think. Maybe that's just that grass is greener on the other side of the thing. I don't know how to talk to Larry and say. But that was what I thought. Now, what do we see here? What stands out with you about these people? The vineyard owner went out and he found people. What kind of people?
Who wanted to work. Who wanted to get paid.
They wanted to get paid. You don't get the impression here that they wanted to work. First of all, they were idle. They didn't already have jobs. They were just standing around. And when the guy came and said, "I'll give you some, I'll pay you a day's wage for coming and working," they did. And so they really didn't have a sense of purpose. They weren't standing there purposefully doing something. There wasn't anything that was structured for them. They didn't have any tasks. They didn't have a sense of mission that they had to accomplish something. We had a lot of people here that were and I don't mean to be judging them. I wasn't there. I don't know them. They may have lost their job. They may have been in a recession riddled job. I don't know. But they at the time, they didn't have anything really to put their hand on, anything that was that they had to do on a daily basis that gave them a sense of self-esteem, probably. He went out and he found, and this is where we know the story. He finds some people at the early morning, and then during the day, he goes back all during the day, and he finds some people at the last minute, brings them in, and here's where we all focus on this part of the story. Pays the first dude a denarius. Now, depending on your Bible and things like that, it may say that it was a penny or 2 pennies. And if you do some research, I looked at one account, and they said in today's wages, it probably would have amounted, would have been enough to feed them for a day. And they said, according to that, in today's wages, it would have been about $74.50. Well, I guess we could all eat on $74.50 a day. But that sounds like a lot of money back then for them. So, but they got their pay, and at first, what happened to the first group? They were happy. They got it. But by the time it got to the last group, what what happened?
They
They
weren't
started to grumble.
They started to grumble. They weren't happy now. And we see this at work, at water coolers or coffee bars or whatever you have. When I was teaching at Lubbock High School, first thing they told me when they walked in is, "This is the teacher's lounge, don't go there." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "All you'll hear is a bunch of carping and a bunch of people complaining about the kids, and they'll run the kids down, and all that's gonna do is twist your mind on those students, and it's just gonna cause you a lot of chaos. Avoid other teachers." I said, "Okay," and pretty much I did. You find the ones eventually that are not going to be the whiners. We have whiners here. They're not gonna be the grumblers. You're gonna find the people here that in this case are negative in their view. Now, in some ways I can understand that. I don't know if I know some of your stories, so I know you have. When I got out of the Air Force, I had no job and a wife. I had no idea what I was going to do. I had no leads or anything. Fortunately, one of the men at church must have been praying because God opened the door and I got to work. I had a job. But then I graduated from college, went to Clovis, New Mexico. Me and my advertising degree and my journalism degree. You know how many advertising agencies there are in Clovis? You want to know where I wound up working? Sherwin-Williams, slapping paint cans around. Do you think I grumbled? Under my breath. But I did. That wasn't my dream. I can remember when we left Kahoma. I remember sitting on the porch with Nora and I literally cried because I knew we needed to move from there to somewhere. Our plan was to move to Lubbock. And I was so frustrated. I was so upset. I did not have a job. And Nora put her arms around me lovingly and said, "Sounds like you got a problem. Get a job." So I jumped in the car and drove up here and literally begged the principal to interview me. Now, all that to say, when I got those jobs, you remember that? Have you ever been in a situation when you get the job, you're grateful. You know what it was like to not have the money, to need the money, to not have something to do. But when you get that job, like I said, it doesn't take long for it to become a job, work. And you forget what you didn't have. And it distorts what you're doing. And so I'm going to read a quote to you from a British professor, a man by the name of Charles Kingsley. And he said, "Thank God every morning when you get up that you have something to do that day, which must be done, whether you like it or not. Being forced to work and forced to do your best will breed within you temperance and self-control, diligence and strength of will, cheerfulness and contentment, and 100 other virtues that the idle will never know." I think Carol I don't know all of you very well, but I know some of Carol's background. You can relate to this story. I thought I worked hard as a teacher. I would come home sometimes and Nora would say, "You look tired." I said, "Yeah, I'm beat." Then one summer, a man by the name of Byron Black said, come on, I'm gonna put you to work. And he stuck me at 4 o'clock in the morning out on a tractor, not a modern tractor, one with no windows, plowing up a field. The wind blew. She dug dirt out of every hole in my body for days. But you know what? In my mind, I still, to this day, I feel good because I worked and I felt good about that. And I think ranch kids, farm kids, we often say we made a mistake raising our kids in the city. We should have raised them in the country because at the end of the day, you have something that you've done. And it does bring a sense of cheer and a sense of accomplishment and self-esteem. And these men right here, I think they forgot that. They didn't have that task still.
Bill,
Ooh, yes.
can I say something?
Oh, I would love to.
When we were first married, Peter's aunt came and told me that being married was work.
Yes.
Amen, sister.
Yeah, but it goes along with your example that, you're in the honeymoon stage and then it gets different. But,
That was,
and so we need to not do that. We need to see that there is a purpose to our work, even if and now as a retired person, I have to, I need some work. When COVID started, I did a puzzle for a week and then I said, I'm going to do a lot of puzzles. I can't do this for another month or 2 or 3. And so we need work. God made us to where we feel better, like the traits you said and that man said. Anyway, thank you.
You're right. About the work part in the marriage too.
Yeah.
It is.
But it goes along with the work. It really does.
It does.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at the rest of this. Read down through 16. Anybody want to start with 11 through 16? If not, I will.
I can.
Okay.
When they received it, they grumbled at the landowner, saying, those who were hired last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day's work and the scorching heat. But he answered and said to one of them, friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go. But I want to give to this last person the same as to you. Is it not lawful for me to do what I want with what is my own? Or is your eye envious because I am generous? So the last shall be first and the first last.
Okay, and that last verse is one of the key things that we're going to focus on here in a minute. They did grumble, and we see it in our jobs. People say things like, well, I heard they make this much, or I don't think I'm getting paid near as much as I'm worth, and things like that. And we have this sense of self that takes over the situation. I'm more worried about me than I am, in this case, the landowner and the job that he gave me to do, the work that he gave me to do. So there's always going to be envy or people sowing seeds of discord or trying to figure out how to get their own perks or their own raise or their own benefit from this thing. If we have a vocation as a disciple, here's how I'm gonna swing a little bit. Remember, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he said, you can go out and get a job and you can earn this money, but there's gonna be grumbling. And I'll get to this in a second. How did the master react to them when they started complaining? What did this man say?
He got a little defensive and said, don't be mad at me. I told you what you would get paid.
She says it so much, don't be mad at me. I tend to think of it more, maybe it's the man in me. He'd say, what? You're mad at me? You agreed for that amount of money. We all make contracts and then we go, oh, I shouldn't have signed that.
If they agree too fast, you should ask for more. Oh man, I should ask for more.
And so, he's saying, and I'm going to say this, if we turn our mind into the idea that we are disciples, and by the way, you're going to start hearing that concept here at the church a lot, that we're changing our mission and our vision to becoming disciples. Make disciples, be disciples, and in the process, we glorify God. The idea is that if our discipleship is our job, if it's our vocation, then wherever we plant our feet, that's where we can do God's work. And we're not to grumble about it. We have that task, that responsibility. We have those things that we're supposed to do. When he says, take your pay and go, I want to give the one who is hired the last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want? And so on. And he says, so the last will be first and the first will be last. Now, I think Jesus, in telling this story, is actually appalled at that behavior. Remember, this comes on the heels of talking to all these religious leaders earlier, and how disgusted he probably was with their religion and their efforts to please God wrongly. And the people who wanted his food, who wanted to be healed, who wanted to listen to him, but then walked away. He now has these disciples who still don't understand. Between chapter 10 and in a couple chapters from here, he tells the disciples 3 different times what's going to happen to him. This is the time when he's telling them, right after this story, if you go down and look in verse 17, he says, he took the 12 disciples apart, and on the way he said to them, behold, we go up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man shall be delivered into the chief priests and scribes, and they shall condemn him to death, and he shall deliver him, and so on. This is the time when he's telling them, this is what's going to happen. He just told them that story about the workers. You don't work for the job. You don't work for the denarius. You work because it's a vocation. It's because something that you do that you love, that you want to do. And you can do that anywhere, anytime. And you're going to have to since he gets into that story, in effect, he's saying, I'm letting you know this is going to happen to me, and you are going to be affected by it. And it's a teaching moment for them. And I think it should be a teaching moment for us as well. Nora told me the clock, is that clock right? 7:45, so I have 5 minutes?
A little more.
Okay. There's another thing that goes on in our culture, and I think we're all guilty of it, and we've seen it on the news a lot in the last year. We see it more and more, and we blame it on certain generations, the millennials or whoever. But for some reason in our society, we've developed this sense of entitlement. We're entitled to
Nothing.
be equal. We're entitled, yeah, that's the reality. We're not entitled to anything. But in our minds and what's in the news and everything else, it's, they got this, I should have this. And this person's saying, well, I worked for mine. Why? Are you working for yours? I don't want to give, and I don't want to get into a whole socialism, Democratic, Republican thing. Don't get me started on that. But we have this thing that we're entitled. Did these men not have this sense of entitlement? And you're not entitled. Like Annette said, you're supposed to do what you're supposed to do. And there's not a sense of entitlement to this thing. In the book of Colossians in chapter 3, Paul says, whatever you do your work heartily as for the Lord. Let someone who understands that we are but the beneficiaries of God's grace, doing our work heartily as for the Lord, rather than for man. We're not doing it for man. We're doing it for God. And we could have got into all the symbolism. As an English teacher, I would have just been euphoric. I could have got into all the symbolism and the metaphors and all the comparisons and things in the story about who the landowner is and who the different people are. And you know that. I've even heard it said in a church setting. If I would have known that God loved me that much, that there was that much grace, I wouldn't have been baptized until I was 97, right before. I could have been having so much fun. But I had all these things I had to do for the church. I was 21, spent all that time. And even in the church, we have those kind of attitudes. Why are they entitled to the same thing I did? I knew them. She used to be a biker chick. She doesn't deserve what I. No. No
He wasn't
offense.
talking about you, Peggy. Yes,
Yes.
he was.
I looked directly at it. But I
I
had
don't
my,
remember calling him that.
I had my bike too. All right. Tell you a quick story. I got about 4 minutes. One of my favorite stories. Do any of you know the name Fiorella LaGuardia?
No, no
Nope.
airport.
Mayor of New York. And as a mayor at the time, he was able to be a magistrate as well. And they brought a man in before him, and this man had stolen some bread because his family was starving. And they brought him in, and he said, according to the law, I have to fine you. I'm going to fine you $10, which at that time was a lot of money. I'm going to fine you $10 because I have to. But I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pay your fine, the $10. And then he stood up and he said, I'm gonna fine you 50 cents, and you 50 cents, and you 50 cents, and you 50 cents. And he went around the courtroom and fined everybody in that room 50 cents because they had the privilege of living in a city, in a society where they had the 50 cents and they didn't have to steal bread for their family. And he said, that should not be. Why do you think he did that? What was the point he was trying to make?
Be thankful for what you have.
Be grateful for what you have. Not that you had it longer or shorter, but you have it. It's a grace that was given to you. It's something that you were blessed with, and you should be happy with it. We have a tendency in our approach to life to always have our arrows pointing out. Like, we're going to attack them. But we never stop to think. There's things that we have to do that people are sending their arrows, towards us as well. It's an equal thing. That's what we're talking about in this place. Can we become self-consumed, self-oriented? It's really easy, isn't it? Me. I want to think about me. I'm hurting. And most of you have found this out. You help somebody else out. You pay attention to them. You spend time with them. You hug somebody. You get more out of that. Probably even than they do. Just sitting with them and not even saying anything, just being there, sharing. That kind of behavior is not self-consumed. It's, I'm concerned for you. And the lesson is, just like these men, I don't deserve more denarii than anybody else. We're all, in the end, going to get the same thing. And we have a mission to tell people that. God's grace is something we should be grateful for. It's something that we work for. And that's our goal in life. Now, you're all going to go to your job, some of you. You're all going to go to your home, do your puzzles. You're all going to spread out from here. And that job, that vocation, that new vocation you have is discipleship. That's what Jesus was telling those 12 men. And he's telling us too. Questions? I lectured rather than did a class.
One time when we went to Mexico and the cars went down, it was one time when Grandma went down there and we had car trouble on the other side. And I looked over the other side, which was the United States. And I think it was right there. And then I thought, why did God put me there and not here? Mm-hmm. And how blessed I was, but we're all blessed because we're all God's children. He had wanted me to do something over there. And, and they have something to do over here. But when you stay in your little box, it's really hard to see what others and maybe going through and all. And that really taught me, to look out more and to see that it's not just me, that God wanted me there for a reason. And wanted these people here that seem to, on their scale, then I think, boy, God doesn't love me as much as they love the USA. And that's how they feel in Africa, is that God's not there. And so, it just was such a picture of, for me, I still go back to that.
And even here, there are people who are suffering who say, God's not here.
Yeah.
Where is he? I don't know. Nora?
I think it was really easy during COVID to be self-consumed, especially like during the stay-at-home order time, where you were isolated and it was easy to to fall into that pattern of just thinking about yourself and your health and how to prevent getting ill and just constantly thinking of you, you know, rather than, even though it was, a time of uncertainty for all of us, it was a time to turn to God and trust Him more, but, Satan was at work during that time and it was easy to fall into that.
You're right.
Are you done
Any
trying to
questions?
do this?
Yeah, okay. Well,
Thank you, Bill.
you're welcome.
Thank you.